to week 1 of English 200 and 201. This week, you're going to begin by reading the chapter A Few Things You Should Know About Creative Writing, which will really give you just an orientation of this class. Then you'll read the beginning of chapter 1, Writing Poetry, pages 14 through 30. I also want to bring to your attention, if you're in English 201, each week you will have an extra assignment that you'll be asked to complete. This will be in addition to the assignments for English 200. This week for English 201, you'll be using the Oxford Book of American Poetry to complete your assignment. More details to follow. So let's start off by thinking about what creative writing is. Creative writing is made up of different genres, including poetry, creative nonfiction, and fiction. There are also other genres and hybrid genres, but for this semester, we'll be working on poetry, creative nonfiction, and fiction. Revision is the act of reconsidering and altering a piece of writing, and it's a vital part of the process. In this class each week, you will write a series of exercises based on whatever we're learning for the week. From those exercises, you will revise the exercise into an assignment. Also, later on, you'll be workshopping your assignments with your peers, trying to find a way to make the writing better and better and better. Some creative writers revise their work hundreds of times. I know when I'm writing, I have to revise at least 10 times to get to the poem that I want to get to. So please feel comfortable, start to feel comfortable with the idea of letting go of any idea that writing is just sitting down and receiving a visit from the muse and writing down a perfect poem, because that's not what we're learning in this class. Creative writing is mining the vast fields of your imagination. Everyone in this class has untapped regions in their brain, in their imaginations that you can tap into. There's experiences you've had in your life. There's stories you've been told. There's so many. There are places you've been or dreamed about going. There's so many things that you don't even know that are inside your brain. And part of what learning to write as a creative writer is learning how to tap into those places you don't even know that you have. In order to be a good writer, you have to write a lot, and that's the only way to improve. You also have to read a lot and embrace the idea of influence. It is not a bad thing if you read a ton of poetry by Adrienne Rich and you end up writing like her in a creative writing class. That's totally okay. A lot of young creative writers, beginning creative writers, think that they shouldn't read some writers because it might influence their own voice. I can tell you right now that it is very rare to find your voice at a very early stage in your career. So please, and even when you have your voice, like for example, I have a very strong voice that I write books in, but I read extensively. I read hundreds of books of poetry a year as a way to understand what people are writing, to learn more about creative writing. It's a vital part of being a creative writer. Learning to write well in a genre requires reading extensively in that genre, as I was saying. And just one more time, revision is crucial to the writing process. So please be prepared to write and rewrite and rewrite. So how this class is going to work is you will attend this class online. You will read the required text. So by attending this class online, what I mean is each Monday you will receive an email that will tell you exactly what you're supposed to read and what you're supposed to do for the week. You will follow the link in that email or just log into Blackboard and look at the week number under our current week, look under the week number that we're in. So for example, under this week, you'd look under week 1, and the first thing listed will be the lecture for the week. You click on that. There should be a video embedded there. That's probably how you're listening to this right now. There'll also be a link to the video in case the embedded video isn't working. You watch that video, and that's like attending class. Then you're going to read the required text. Then you're going to participate in class writing exercises and workshops. Those will be the exercises found at the end of this lecture. And then you're going to choose an exercise to revise for your formal assignment and turn it in by the end of the week. You will see under this week's content, Assignment 1. Assignment 1 will ask you to revise any of the exercises we worked on over the course of this week and turn in a final, revised, perfect, to the best of your ability this week poem for the week. We have one main required text for those of you in English 200, and that's Creative Writing, an Introduction to Poetry and Fiction. This is different than the 4-genre text that's used oftentimes during the year. And here's the ISBN. It's available. Hopefully you all have it already, as I told you in the orientation, but in case you don't, here's a reminder. For those of you in English 201, you're required to also have 3 other books. The Oxford Book of American Poetry, which we'll be using this week, the Best American Essays, and the Best American Short Stories. You are also encouraged to read my book, Gold Passage. This gives you an example. This gives you a way to see what a published book of poems looks like, and it also shows you what my writing is like. If you don't want to purchase it, you can also just Google me and read some of my poems online. For those of you who want to do even more than what's listed in the class, and I really encourage you to. And for everyone, first, I recommend you keep a daily journal. If you really want to improve your abilities as a creative writer, then you should try and practice daily writing. That means keep a journal with you at all times and note down anything you see or hear that strikes you. You can use these notes later when you're writing your weekly writing exercises. Plus, if after finishing your week's worth of work, sorry, that's a tongue twister. That's alliteration, you guys. When words begin with the same sound, you are looking for. If after you finish your week's worth of work, you are looking for more information about creative writing, click on Going Further on the left-hand navigation. That lists a bunch of links of more information, great resources for finding more poems to read, more stories to read, more creative nonfiction to read. All right, so this week we're going to start off our course dialogue. It's going to be an introduction. One of the most important aspects of the creative writing class is creating an environment where everyone feels welcomed and encouraged to try new things. Let's begin creating this environment by getting to know one another. Please click on the link under this week's content, Introduction Discussion, to get started. In this discussion forum, you'll be asked to post the following information: your name and where you are from, your background, if any, in creative writing, and remember, there's no requirement of having a background in creative writing to take this class. Your favorite poem or story and an explanation as to why this is your favorite poem or story. Please also include the text or link to the text in your post. To receive full credit, please post your initial post by Friday at 11:59 p.m. Then please respond to at least 3 of your peers' posts by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. For details on how you will be graded in discussion forums, please see the rubric posted under Start here. It's very important when you respond to your peers' post, you don't just say, "Hey, nice to meet you." You want to take the conversation further. So if they posted a poem or story, respond to that about that poem or story in a deeper way and extend out the conversation. Those of you who are in English 201, you also have a second dialogue that you need to complete this week. I'd like you to find a poet in the Oxford Book of American Poetry who you aren't already familiar with. Read all selections by the poet and find a bio about the poet on the Poetry Foundation website or poets.org website. Write a post in the English 201 discussion for week 1. In this post, introduce the poet you discovered. What is his or her name, and what did you learn about his or her biography? Type up one of the poems you found by this poet that you like and share as part of your post. Use poetic terms such as metaphor, simile, line breaks, concrete language, etc. to explain why you like this poem. Please post your initial post by Friday at 11:59 p.m. and respond to at least one of your peers' posts by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Don't feel like you have to stop at one. If you want to respond to everyone's posts, it's a small class for English 201. Feel free to respond to everyone's. When you respond, though, please make sure, again, you take the conversation further. You respond back about the poem that your peer has selected and try to add to the conversation. So let's talk a little bit about what is poetry and how to write good poems. You're going to begin by reading a few things you should know about poetry on pages 14 and 15. A poem, according to the poet Edward Hirsch, is an inexplicable, though not incomprehensible, event in language that is experienced through words. It is a language at its most intensified. A poet's work is to name the unnameable, to point at frauds, to take sides, start arguments, shape the world and stop it going to sleep. That's from the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. It can appear in meter or free verse. There's even poetry that looks like prose. That's called the prose poem. When you write good poetry, you avoid cliches. Cliches are sayings that we say over and over and over again in our language. Remember, the idea of poetry is to make things seem fresh and new and exciting. Use concrete language that incorporates all of your senses, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch. Remember that poetry isn't a magical visit from the muse. That means it isn't something that just happens all of a sudden like a flash of lightning. You have to work for good poetry. Most poems begin from an idea, but go through many, many drafts before they reach their finished form. So how do you go about writing good poems? You write a lot, you read a lot, and you learn how to revise. There are several elements of a poem. There are lines and stanza. A poem is made up of lines. They don't go, a poem doesn't go all the way to the end of the page. There are, anywhere between 1 and 30 words in a line, right? There's a limited amount of words. Stanzas are like the little paragraphs in a poem. So a number of lines that are kept together based on meaning in a poem. And the word stanza in Italian means little room. Meter and rhythm are the regular patterns of accented syllables in a poem. Rhythm is how a poem flows. You can hear the rhythm of a poem when you read it aloud. And this has to do with the music of poetry. Images, symbols, and figurative language. These are concrete images. That means images that incorporate sensory details. Symbols, metaphor, and simile. Diction, syntax, and the language of poetry. That includes word choice, always choosing the best possible word, and in the way words are put together. Poetic forms such as the sonnet or the sestina. Many of these things we're going to begin talking about next week, including metaphor and simile in poetic forms and diction, syntax, and language in poetry. But today we are going to talk about the types of poetry and also the use of concrete language. So you'd be ready to write your first poems this week. So there's two types of poetry. There's lyric poetry, and those are shorter, non-narrative poems that present a single speaker who expresses a state of mind or a process of thought and feeling. Or narrative poetry, where a poem uses the elements of storytelling and uses multiple points of view. Another really important thing to think about when you're writing poetry is to think about using concrete versus abstract language. Abstract language is useful, but it has no physical presence. Words like love, hate, fear, joy, jealousy, justice, truth, and anger, these all have different meanings to me than they do to you. Think about it, for example, if I say the word friendship, it's a very different word for each of us, right? But if I ask you to look at a picture of your best friend, that will invoke images and ideas and we're called memories, right? The idea of a specific person that you have in mind when you think of the word friendship, that makes it a really concrete idea. Concrete is centered in the real, specific. It's rooted in the sensory experience. It uses images created with concrete language to describe things you can see, taste, touch, smell, or hear. Poems are broken up into lines and stanza. Poetic lines typically begin on the left-hand side of the page and end where the poet decides to break the line. Where a line begins and where it breaks counts as it places emphasis on the beginning and end words. The white space around words is also important. It gives rest and it gives more importance to the things that are surrounded by that white space. A line that ends with punctuation is end stopped, which slows down the pace of the poem. A line that doesn't is enjambed. Enjambment tends to speed up a poem. So if the end of a line has no punctuation, you read through that line to the next line. Stanzas, the word stanza, as I said, comes from Italian. It means little rooms. It's the groupings of lines in a poem. Often the lines that are grouped together are connected in thought or purpose, like paragraphs in prose. There are many ways to group lines. If you have two lines together, that's called a couplet. 3 is called a tercet, 4 a quatrain, 5 a quintet, 6 a sestet, 7 a septet, and 8 an ostet. So let's look at a couple of examples from our book. We'll be looking at Gail White's poem, My Personal Recollections of Not Being Asked to the Prom, which is a sonnet. We'll be looking at Ruth Stone's poem, Winter, which is a wonderful lyric poem. And we'll be looking at Duration by Ray Amatrout. The first poem, My Personal Recollections of Not Being Asked to the Prom, is this. Please look at your book on page 20 if you want to read along. I never minded my unpopularity in those days. Books were friends and poets dead were lovers. Brainy girls were still a rarity, and boys preferred big bosoms to well-read and saucy wits. I look back now with pity on the young me I didn't pity then. I didn't know that I was almost pretty and might have had a charm for older men. And my poor mom, who never bought a fluffy ball gown or showed me how to dress my hair, she must have wondered where she got this stuffy daughter. She didn't say it, but her stare asked whether genes or nurture were to blame. But I got married, mother, all the same. You'll see in this poem, which is a sonnet and has a rhyming couplet at the end. The couplet are the last two lines of the poem with blame and same rhyming. You'll see there's a lot of enjambment in this poem, meaning that the poet doesn't have any punctuation at the end of the line. So after unpopularity on the first line, there's no punctuation to the next line. There's some rhyming happening throughout this poem, but it's so subtle that we don't hear it. It's not sing-songy, which is a really good way to use rhyme in poetry. Also, think about the real specific images that this poet is using in order, not just specific, but concrete images, in order to convey what it was like to be a kind of a bookish girl in high school rather than being somebody who was being asked to the prom. The second poem we're going to look at, we actually have here. It's called Winter by Ruth Stone. The 10 o'clock train to New York, coaches like loaves of bread powdered with snow. Steam wheezes between the couplings. Stripped to plywood, the station's cement standing room imitates a Russian novel. It is now that I remember you. Your profile becomes the carved handle of a letter knife. Your heavy-lidded eyes slip under the seal of my widowhood. It is another raw winter. Stray cats are suffering. Starlings crowd the edges of chimneys. It is a drab misery that urges me to remember you. I think about the subjugation of women and horses, brutal exposure, weather that forces, that strips. In our time, we met in ornate stations, arching up with 19th century optimism. I remember you running beside the train, waving goodbye. I can produce a facsimile of you standing behind a column of polished oak to surprise me. Am I going toward you or away from you on this train? Discarded junk of other minds is strewn beside the tracks. Mounds of rusting wire, grotesque pop art of dead motors, senile warehouses. The train passes a station, fresh people standing on the platform, their faces expecting something. I feel their entire histories ravish me. Now in Ruth Stone's poem, which is not in a form, you see very clearly her using a great deal of metaphor and simile. That means using other words to extend the idea of words. So coaches like loaves of bread. So she's comparing the coaches of a train to loaves of bread using a simile. She gives she personifies the steam, making it wheeze, right? She compares the station cement standing room to a Russian novel. There's a lot of places we could go on and on, all the different, or the warehouses are senile, right? She personifies so many things in this poem. The main thing I want you to think about too in this poem is how she ends it. So she ends it by slamming the door. And there's a lot of ways you can end a poem. You can end a poem by just subtly closing the door. You can leave it ajar a little bit so we can still look into it and think about it afterwards. Or you can slam the door with a word like ravish me. Ravish me is a word that means actually, it can mean even to rape someone, to just completely overwhelm them. So when she's passing the people on the platform, she feels their entire history is just completely overtaking her, which is a very strong image. The final poem we're going to be talking about is called Duration by Ray Armatrap. Those flurries of small pecks my mother called leaky faucet kisses. Late sun winks from a power line beyond the neighbor's tree. In heaven, where repetition's not boring, silver whistles of blackbirds needle the day-long day. We're still on the air, they say. So this poem ends with the door ajar. We're meant to keep looking into this poem, to listen to the sounds and repetitions. We're supposed to feel this poem and the white space between the words. Notice how small the lines are. There are only 2 to 3 words on a page. Sometimes, on a line, there's 2 to 3, sometimes 4 words per line. Only 2 lines per stanza. That really airs out the images that are being presented. So now that we've looked at some examples, I'd like you to give writing a try. I'm going to go over several different exercises that I'd like you to do over the course of the week. The first one is called a 10-minute spill. This will only take you 10 minutes, and that's all you're allowed to give yourself. You're going to write a 10-line poem. The text must include a proverb, adage, cliche, or familiar phrase, such as she's a brick house, or between the devil and the deep blue sea, or 1 foot in the grave, or a stitch in time saves 9. Just try to think of something that you hear all the time, or you've heard a lot during your life that means something to you. You must change this expression in some way in your poem. Your poem also must include at least 7 of the following words: cave, brambles, thread, fog, breath, buzz, cloud, mother, or pour. You only have 10 minutes to complete this text. You will be posting this under writing journal entry number 1. Writing journal entry number 2, abstract to concrete. Take an abstraction like fear, anger, or joy that's important to you and write a poem that substitutes a particular moment or person for that abstraction. Don't use the abstract word at all, not even in the title. Let it arise in the concrete images. Make sure you use all of your senses to describe the moment or person. Your poem should be at least 20 lines long. Writing journal entry, this should say number 3, object poem or ode to salt. This is a little bit more complex than the first 2, so make sure you do the first 2 writing exercises first. Think of an ordinary object such as a salt shaker, a hairbrush, or a fork. Use your 5 senses to examine the object. What does the object look like, sound like, smell like, feel like? What does the object remind you of? Where could the object take you? If the object could teach you a lesson, what would it be? Be as specific as possible as you write. And remember, you're supposed to use your imagination on this. So, for example, if you're writing about a fork and you want to talk about what it smells like, you don't have to say it smells like metal, right? You can say it smells like the mercury an ancient emperor swallowed to become immortal, okay? Try to go strange in the way that you use your sensory images. Your poem needs to be at least 40 lines long, and you are not allowed to rhyme unless it's an internal rhyme. That means words within the line are rhyming against each other. That's okay, but not the end words. They cannot rhyme. For an example, listen to Neruda's Ode to Salt. There's a link here to it, but I'm also going to read it to you here. Ode to Salt by Pablo Neruda. This salt in the salt cellar I once saw in the salt mines. I know you won't believe me, but it sings. Salt sings. The skin of the salt mines sings with a mouth smothered by the earth. I shivered in those solitudes when I heard the voice of the salt in the desert near Antofagasta. The nitrous pampa resounds, a broken voice, a mournful song. In its cave, the salt moans, mountain of buried light, translucent cathedral, crystal of the sea, oblivion of the waves. And then on every table in the world, salt, we see your piquant powder sprinkling vital light upon our food, preserver of the ancient holds of ships, discoverer on the high seas, earliest sailor of the unknown shifting byways of the foam, dust of the sea. In you the tongue receives a kiss from ocean night. Taste imparts to every seasoned dish your ocean essence. The smallest miniature wave from the salt cellar reveals to us more than domestic whiteness. In it, we taste finitude. So when you're writing your own ode, please make sure you try to think of all kinds of different ways to talk about whatever object you've chosen. So if you're talking about a basketball hoop, for example, maybe some of you are following the finals and you are talking about a basketball hoop. You want to look up who invented the basketball hoop? How old is it? Where is it from? What's its backstory, right? What would a basketball hoop say to you when it swallows your basketball? Or try to really think around the object. Tell us a story that we've never heard from that object. After you've completed your exercises this week, you want to look at least one of your exercises, go back to it, take it out of your journal, and when you're writing your exercises, please write them directly into your journal. Okay, don't upload a document of any kind. It needs to be written exactly in your journal so I can read it. You can also run spell check. There's spell check in your journal, and I highly recommend doing so I can actually read what you've written. Remember, you're writing it and working on it in your journal, and then sending it to me. Then you're going to choose one of those 3 exercises that you did this week, and you're going to ask yourself the following things as you revise it into a Word document that you will upload as your assignment this week, and I'll tell you more details about that in a second. You want to ask yourself, have you started with a concrete image or a series of images rather than an abstract idea? Have you gotten rid of all the cliches? Have you chosen the best words for what you mean? Have you used metaphor, simile, and other figures of speech to create layers of meaning in your work? Does your title contribute to the meaning of your poem? All poems that you turn in must have a title. Have you read your work out loud to yourself? If so, how does it sound? Do your line breaks contribute to the meaning and rhythm of your poem? Have you used repetition of sounds and words and other patterns without going overboard? If you are using a form, which none of you are using this week, so we'll skip this one, but next week when you're revising, have you allowed for variations that keep the focus on the poem itself and not on the form? So finally, for your formal assignment number 1, each week you will be asked to spend time revising one of the writing exercises you wrote for the week. Writing exercises will be graded on how much effort you put into crafting a finished piece of writing. Use the questions on the previous slide to help you revise your exercise into a poem. Don't forget to review grammar and spelling. Please type up your document and upload it under formal assignment number 1. Please only upload .doc or .docx or PDF files. This is due Sunday at 11:59 p.m. No late work will be accepted. All right, guys, that's it for this week. Next week, we will continue with poetry, and then the following week, we will move on to creative nonfiction. It's great to meet you. I'm really looking forward to working with you, and I will see you online.